Hello, welcome to Perspectives on Life. I'm your host, Benjamin Day, Executive Director of the Marblehead Counseling Center. Today I'm joined by Paul Crosby, licensed independent clinical social worker at the Counseling Center, and I might add, former Executive Director at the Counseling Center. He joins me today to discuss de-stressing stress.
Right.
Hello, Paul, and welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's been a while since I've been here. It's nice to be back.
Well, let's first get a definition out of the way.
Okay.
What is stress?
Stress is the reaction of the person's body and mind to a threat. It's either a real threat or a perceived threat. And it's an automatic response. We can't control it. It's part of our makeup as human beings and how we survived from the Neanderthal days till now. And the physical changes it causes sets us up into a fight or flight response. There is a difference between fear, stress, and anxiety. And fear is, pretend you're walking through a jungle and you see a tiger. That's an immediate threat. Your body responds with a fear emotion, okay? The threat, for example, that you feel after 9/11 terrorist attacks, in which you might think, I'm worried that there's going to be another attack somewhere. That's anxiety. And it's a mental stress. But stress by itself is kind of a combination of fear and anxiety. It's both mental and physical, and it causes both mental and physical reactions in us, which is what we're going to go into pretty soon. And it's estimated that between 70 and 90% of all visits to a primary care physician are stress related. That's how prevalent it is. So, yeah.
So now, are there different kinds of stress, or is it just one type?
There's two basic kinds of stress. One is a physical stress. For example, it's caused by too little sleep, not enough nutrition, illness, headaches, stomach and bowel problems, that kind of stress. And then there's a mental stress that's such as things, it comes from things like financial worries, job worries, retirement, children growing up and moving out, children being injured. Those are some of those basic two kinds of causes of stress. And by far and away, the number one stress that there is, any guesses? More than marriage stress, more than kid stress.
Financial.
No, job stress.
Job. Well,
By far and away, job
financial.
stress is number one.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so there are those two different kinds. Yeah.
And we know that there's effects on our minds. So, how does stress affect our bodies? I assume it's the body issues that are driving people to their physician.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, when stress hits, similar to fear and anxiety, but more specifically the stress, what happens is inside the core of the brain, there's a section called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the most primitive part of the brain, and it's a survival response and emotional control center of the brain, okay? What happens is that when a threat is perceived, that can take one of two paths to get to us. The most immediate path is to go right from the sensory input, such as a visual or a smell or a hearing. If you think of a deer, when they sense danger, they pick up their head and their ears are flapping around trying to pinpoint. Those are the sensory inputs, and they enter into a section of the brain called the thalamus. Okay. Now the thalamus, if it's an immediate threat, will shoot a signal right over to the amygdala, and the amygdala in response will start some body chemistry changes in us. If it's not as a dire threat, it will go through from the thalamus to the prefrontal lobes, where is a seat of executive functions where we can make decisions, we can think out things, we can take time and step back and analyze, so that's not an immediate response. And then we can come up with a way to respond which makes sense to the threat. So it's a slower process, okay? But either way, when it gets to the amygdala will start sending out two signals to two parts of the body to send out cortisol and adrenaline. These are two hormones that will start running through our body and signaling different parts of our body to change. And here's what it does. It takes it takes the heart rate and speeds it up. It putting more oxygen into the system. It shuts down the center of the body, especially the stomach and the intestines for digestion. It shuts that down because it wants more blood to go into the arms and into the legs, so we're ready to either fight or run away, okay? Fight or flight. It causes the brain, gets more oxygen to the brain and causes it to focus more on the threat. So it'll ignore outside input and just focus on the threat. And it does all of this in between 4 and 10 seconds. Your entire body has changed. Think of it, if you were facing a tiger, you wouldn't want to say to the tiger, well, give me a couple minutes, I got to figure this thing out first, you know, right? Your body has to get ready right away too, and that's what it does. So remember, this is a survival instinct that came from back in the caveman days. So yeah. So what happens is the blood pressure starts to go up. The blood sugar is increased because we want more energy in our body. The coagulants of our blood actually increase. And think of if we do get injured in a fight, we don't want to bleed out. So our body automatically pumps more coagulants. And it increases our reaction time. That all those changes happen with no more than 10 seconds, and we're ready to fight or run away. So me, I would run.
So, but this is at the initial threat.
Yes. This is
So if there is an anticipation of the threat stops.
right.
How long does it take for these stress mechanisms to go away?
Believe it or not, it takes 2 hours for the body to return to normal, down to the normal blood chemistry levels, which is one reason why I tell parents, if they have a fight with their teenager and the teenager goes off to their room, give it a couple hours before you go up there and start talking again. If you go up right away, you're just going to continue the disagreement that's going on. Yeah, so it takes 2 hours for the body to reduce down to normal levels. Yeah.
So stress is both a survival mechanism,
Yeah.
but I suspect that the issues come about, the physical issues come about, because the threat goes away, but the hormonal changes and the body changes don't.
Take a while.
Take a while.
Yeah.
So what are the effects of it not dissipation?
Well, this is kind of the purpose of our talk here today, is to talk about what happens when stress doesn't go away. When either it's a prolonged stress, for example, a member of the family is ill for a long time, or it's stress points that come one right after another. You know, I lose my job, I lose my house, my wife gets sick, my kids can't go to private school anymore, all one right after another, continuous stress. What happens is it takes a toll on the body. And this is why one of the reasons we're here today is to talk about what can be done. Remember that all the time we feel the stress, adrenaline and cortisol are being pumped through our system to keep us ready to fight or flee. Prolonged pressure, such as a series of job losses or marital difficulties, can have an effect of very detrimental effect on the body and the mind. For example, in the digestive system, will literally stop digesting food. The intestines digest the food, the stomach becomes the kind of the tank that holds the food in place until it's digested. Well, if the intestines stop digesting the food, the stomach is there pumping acid into the food, trying to break it down. Okay, ulcers happen when stress and constipation will happen. When stress is pulled off, all of a sudden diarrhea could happen from the release of the tension. Okay, in the immune system, one of two things happen: either the immune system is dampened, and we're much more susceptible to illness at that point, or the very opposite could happen. The immune system kicks up and overactivates, and it increased risk to autoimmune diseases will come in. So one or the other happens. Either we have more immunity or less immunity. Either way, we're in trouble. In the nervous system, and this is where we get into a lot of the mental health stuff, the fight or flight response not shutting off leads to increased anxiety, leads to depression, feelings of helplessness, feelings of impending doom. And it actually starts, the adrenaline and cortisol actually start turning around. Instead of being enhancers to our activity, it actually starts depressing our activities, and it acts as a sedative. And in turn, that can lead to more depression. So, and lastly, in the cardiovascular system, because the stress response is pumping in cortisol, it leads to higher rates of heart attack. Blood pressure goes up, blood lipids or fats go up, and this can lead not only to heart attacks but also to strokes. So all of that can be done with either prolonged stress from one issue or a series of stress points that keep on coming along.
Is there a quick fix for all of this? I guess the answer would be just stop stressing.
That's the easy answer.
But that's an answer, but I suspect that that's not an advice that most people can follow.
Yeah, you just can't say, don't worry about it, take it easy, relax, You're not Jimmy Buffett, so, right? And alcohol, by the way, is not a problem either, a problem solver either, because alcohol consumption, again, alcohol attacks your stomach lining and can lead to ulcers all by itself. Plus, we all know what alcohol addiction can lead to. So, the one thing that we have to know is that stress is unavoidable. It's going to be part of our lives. So the question comes in not how can we avoid it, but how can we handle it? We can't avoid it. We can only learn to handle it. And there are different ways of handling it, and there's three different ways. Either we can change the environment we live in, or in which the stressors are coming to us. For example, if we're feeling a lot of job stress, find another job. Or we can learn how to cope better with the demands of that environment that we're in, or we can do a combination of both.
I suspect the first piece, the former, learning to, or finding a way out of the stress, changing jobs,
Yeah.
is the more difficult of them. So realistically, we're left with
Okay.
the second piece, which is to learn to handle the stresses in our lives.
Okay. Then there are several things we can do. There's some quick fixes. Things like go for a walk, take a vacation, visit a friend, shift our attention to a different anxiety. Then there are long-term fixes, such as, if we can, change a job, get other people to do some of your duties so you take pressure off you. If the marriage is a problem, long-term is separation or divorce. Moving to a more restful place to live, maybe that doesn't have any snow. That might be a good thing. So those are kind of some practical, quick fixes. Overall, I'll give you some tips that we can do. First of all, take care of your body. Eat, but don't overeat. Get exercise, but don't over-exercise. Get enough sleep. That's probably the one thing that Americans don't do well enough. We're seeing kids, teenagers, now getting like 5 hours of sleep on average, when they should be getting 8 hours of sleep on it. As adults, we should be getting between 7 and 7.5 hours of sleep, you and I. If we don't get enough sleep, we go into a sleep deficit mode, and it becomes even, it enhances the stress on us, because we can never make up that sleep deficit. One of the things, and I can give you an example, one of the best things we can do is to shift our attitude to a positive way of thinking, okay? For example, I was going to give a talk on stress, actually, a couple weeks ago, and I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about the talk and how am I going to present it, what am I going to say, what if they don't like it, what can I do to, so I was stressing myself out. So I said, wait a minute, stop this and think about something pleasant. Get your mind away from what you're doing and project, like sitting on the beach watching the ocean waves crash on the beach, or think of a leaf falling from a tree and floating down to the earth. So I redirect my thoughts, and I change my attitude from one of worry to a more positive outlook. That's probably one of the biggest things. One of my favorite things to do is humor, as you well know. Laughing. So there's a physiological effect that happens with laughing. When we have a good laugh, our blood pressure actually rises, okay? And then when we're done laughing, it actually falls down below where it was when we started. And amazingly enough, in that lower position, people become more able to problem solve, much more creative in their problem solving. So if you're stuck on something that's stressful, or stuck on a problem you can't solve, get out and do some good laughing, watch your funny things on YouTube or on the TV or on a movie. Get in some good jokes, which I like, watch, and you'll actually feel better and the stress will go down. So that's, the next thing to do is to share your feelings with somebody else, what you're going through. Just the act of sharing seems to relieve us of some of that stress. And lastly, if we cannot handle the stress, getting professional help from a counselor, for example, or other forms is the way to go. We might need some professional help to do that.
I suspect that people get into habits that accentuate stress, just accentuate them, and that stressful behavior puts them at a disadvantage in terms of clearly thinking, solving problems, increasing their health issues.
Exactly.
If someone were to come in and started working with someone, what would be some ways that a therapist, a counselor might work with them to help them overcome their stressed behavior?
Okay, that's good. Actually, there's some very simple things that counselors will help to do. One of the things is they're going to teach people how to let themselves down, how to do deep breathing, how to clear their minds out. Yoga, for example, is a great technique as a stress reliever, because it slows us down and refocuses us. But a therapist, what they would do is talk out the problem with somebody, try to help them come to the creative problem solving solution, but also teach a technique of breathing. Now, if we take a step back to the beginning of our talk today, we saw that if the amygdala gets lit up, it's going to start pumping cortisone and or signaling the organs to pump cortisol and adrenaline into the system. If we can stop that soon enough, we're not going to go into the stress mode. Okay. One of the things you can do to stop that is deep breathing. So it's a slowing down and focusing on your breath, maybe slowing down to maybe 4 to 5 breaths a minute, and emptying your mind, making it a blank slate, so that there's no thoughts there, and just relax, and that will stop the adrenaline and cortisol from happening. The other thing we can do that therapists can help someone do is learn how to, when they feel that immediate response, step back. Remember, what we prefer to do, instead of the amygdala lighting up right away, we prefer to go through the frontal lobes of the brain, because when that happens, we can think out what the problem is and what the solutions are, rather than just reacting to them. So the therapist can teach a person how to step back from that immediate response and use their front part of their brain to analyze and then creatively problem solve the stress points. Does that make sense? Or?
It does.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, I think some of our viewers might be wondering, well, the demands of my job are such that it's just the stress of the job. And
True.
I'm going and going and going, and
Yeah.
I have no way to slow down. What would be some recommendations to de-stress that situation? If by definition they're in physicians who work in emergency rooms,
Yeah.
or
but they're-
attorneys in courtrooms,
Right.
or teachers in a classroom, and I suspect, I mean, I could go on with lots of examples, but there are situations where the individual is, by definition, being stressed
Right. By the environment that
by
they're
the
in.
environment, and they can't, as you had mentioned earlier,
Change.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are some sort of practical things that they can do in that sort of environment to take a de-stressing moment? What to do?
I think that one of the first things I would say to people like that is to realize that you're not Superwoman or Superman. You can't do everything. You can't cover everything. What you need to do is to prioritize what's most important to do. And I divide prioritize into 3 pots. Pot A is, these things have to get done today. Pot B is, it'd be nice to do these today, but if they miss today, no big deal. Part C is, throw them away. This stuff doesn't need to be done. So one thing is to reduce the amount of tasks that you're doing. The second thing might be to try to delegate some of these tasks to other people. How we doing? And to take them off your plate so that you are now just the monitor of what's happening rather than the doer of the tasks themselves. Often that's not possible, but a lot of times you can actually find somebody else to do some of your work, which is not so bad. The last thing I would do is to be sure that you take the time to take care of yourself, okay? Knowing that if you're going to work 12, 15, 14 hours a day, at some point your body's going to break down. It's worth the investment in yourself to take the time to slow it down and to take time away from it. I'm working with somebody now who doesn't do that, and she is pretty much burned out of her job right now, and she's ready to leave it. Rather than pacing herself while she did it, she tried to do everything and do it too fast. So those are some of the suggestions I would give. Yeah. You could also go to your boss and talk about it. I don't know if bosses will be interested.
Some are, and I guess some aren't.
Yeah.
But I think the idea is that the less stressed someone is, the more productive they become. It's sort of
counterindicated.
Right.
Yeah.
We tend to think, well, I'll do more, but the actual output becomes less refined.
Yes.
And so they're only have to redo the very things that they started out
That's
doing.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So in the last few minutes, what kinds of, summing it up, how do we de-stress?
Well, so summing it up is stress is unavoidable. We can only learn how to handle it better. There was one other thing I didn't mention, I should have mentioned. Medication is available for stress. I often, as a therapist, will not go into that right away. I want people to learn the natural ways that they can control stress. But sometimes stress is so overwhelming. For example, a loss of a spouse, for example, a death of a spouse, that some forms of medication are useful. Some forms you just use when you need them. Some you're on a low dosage for a long time. But my preference is to first try to learn how to handle it naturally. And that would be by giving yourself permission to take time out, to nurture yourself, to take care of yourself. Another thing I like to do is to have people set small goals so they get some personal satisfaction. I've done that. I can check it off the list. I don't have to worry. If people are like me and wake up in the middle of the night thinking of things, what I suggest to them is to have a little pad of paper and a pen right by the bed and just jot down a quick note. Can't forget the bank deposit. Or I can't, I have to talk to the bank about my mortgage, for example. And then when they write that down, in their mind say, I give myself permission to let go of it now, because I know when I wake up in the morning, I'm not going to forget it. It's on the pad. I wrote it down. So for right now, I can let it go. So that's one of the things I try to help people do. The other thing I try to help them do, especially if they wake up in the middle of the night, can't get back to sleep, is to get up. If 20 minutes go by in which you can't shut off, get up and distract yourself with something else, such as a book or TV or something like that.
Or perhaps a funny movie or a cartoon.
That's right, yes.
Well, we're going to have to stop here.
Okay.
I think we could keep going on.
Good.
But for now, we'll just stop. I'd like to thank you. I mean, we're out of time. And thank you for this very interesting and informative talk
You're
on
welcome.
de-stressing stress.